Yes, sir. May it please the court. Good morning. Nicholas Godejohn stabbed and killed Miss Dee Dee Blanchard. We're not contesting that. We're here because the state has charged Nick with murder in the first degree. You'll hear some evidence that Nick was autistic and perhaps he was unable to form the necessary intent to commit murder in the first degree. When everything's said and done, I ask that you find Nick not guilty of murder in the first degree and consider other means of homicide. Now, Nick didn't come into this world like most of us. He was born in the spring of 1989. He was born with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. His tiny brain was deprived of oxygen, and his family knew that there were going to be developmental delays. Nick went to school, in elementary school. He was diagnosed with autism. Nick was raised by his mother, a single mother at the time who went through boyfriends back and forth. She worked several jobs to try to make ends meet, but she didn't give Nick the emotional support he needed. She was often absent, wasn't there. Nick's time was spent on the internet. He stayed in an upstairs bedroom on Cherry Street in Big Bend, Wisconsin, and that was his outlet to the world. And while on that computer, he met Gypsy Blanchard in October 2012 on a Christian dating site. It wasn't too long before they were in love. Nick loved Gypsy with all his heart. Now, Nick was autistic, had a different perception of the world. And Gypsy knew he was autistic. She accepted that. Nick knew that Gypsy was in a wheelchair, and he accepted that. But it didn't take too long for Nick to learn from Gypsy that she didn't need to be in that wheelchair. And this is what the world was led to believe. Gypsy's mother kept her in this condition for charity, sympathy, attention, money, for a number of reasons. Gypsy was held captive in this wheelchair. At one point in time, I believe in 2011, Gypsy tried to escape. She left the house, walking without her wheelchair, made a phone call, and had a friend pick her up. Didn't take too long for Dee Dee Blanchard, Dee Dee, Gypsy's mother, to pick her up. Gypsy was taken home. She was chained to the bed. She was beaten with clothes hangers. Gypsy was not allowed to leave her mother. She wasn't allowed to be free. And she wanted a relationship outside of her home. She wanted a relationship with Nick. They talked about murder a year before it happened, but Gypsy formulated another plan. Why don't I try to bring you into my life, introduce you, my mom will get to know you, and we'll go from there. Gypsy stole some money from her mom, sent it to Nick, purchased a bus ticket. Nick drove down on a bus from Wisconsin for the first time in 2015, in March of 2015, and stayed in a hotel that Gypsy paid for. Now, the idea was that they were going to go to an IMAX movie. They were going to go see Cinderella together. And they did. They both met there at the movie theater, talked to one another as if they'd never met before, like they didn't have any idea who each other was. And Gypsy's hope was that she would bond with this man in front of her mother, develop a friendship, and that her mother would accept that. Ultimately, they sat next to one another during that movie, and eventually they were able to get out of the theater. They went into the men's room and had sexual intercourse. When they went back into the theater, Gypsy's mother made sure they didn't sit next to one another. and Gypsy was heartbroken. She wanted her mom to accept Nick, and her mom described Nick as creepy. Gypsy knew there was only one way she was going to be able to spend a life with Nick. There was only one way to get out from under the grasp of her mother, and that was to kill her mother. Gypsy formulated this plan, and she wavered on it. For a while, she was committed to it. Later, she decided, no, that's not the right thing. Nick was happy to do whatever Gypsy wanted. He was always compliant. And finally, Gypsy said, it's getting worse here. This has to be done. She stole some more money from her mother, provided that to Nick to come down on a bus and stay in a hotel. She stole a knife from Walmart so that Nick could use that as the murder weapon, and provided Nick with gloves and tape and everything he would need to go through with her plan. Nick arrived there at the house. The knife was ready, gloves were ready, tape was ready. He entered that home and saw Gypsy standing there. A girl who could walk, not someone captive in a wheelchair. Looking around the living room, there were wheelchairs. The devices that bound her. And Nick went through with Gypsy's plan. Before they left town, they mailed the knife back to Wisconsin. Gypsy got everything ready for that. They put Gypsy's address there on Volunteer Way as the return address. They dropped it in the mail. And they went to Wisconsin. Once they got to Wisconsin, Gypsy put a Facebook post on a shared account, an account she shared with her mother, that said, the bitch is dead, etc., etc. The goal there, and Gypsy will tell you this, was that she wanted her mother's body to be found. She wanted her mother to have a proper burial. And Gypsy will also tell you that she never thought she would be caught, that people would just forget about her, that they would bury her mom, and the world would move on. Before she left the house, she stole approximately $5,000 from her mom that her mom kept in the house in cash. Her goal was to start a new life with that. Her and Nick would live off that money for a while, and then start a family together. You're going to hear testimony about Nick's autism. You're probably going to hear from a couple of doctors who are going to tell you Nick is autistic. He has a low IQ. He suffers cognitive disabilities. And in the end, folks, you're going to understand the dynamics of this case, that Nick wasn't able to formulate the necessary mental state to commit murder in the first degree. I expect you'll find Nick not guilty of murder in the first degree. And you will have the opportunity to consider lesser degrees of homicide. I ask that you keep an open mind, and I appreciate your attention this morning.